The reserve currency is now gold. In other words, what good is the dollar? It's only a matter of time until the world increasingly de-dollarizes. De-dollarization is already underway. We are on thin ice in a way that I don't think has ever been true in our country's history.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm so grateful to have Colonel MacGregor joining me during these very trying times. Thank you so much for doing this pretty last minute, Colonel.
Oh, sure. Happy to do it.
I would like to get a little bit more informed because both sides are saying very contradicting things. I feel like there are many sides to this. So, first of all, we had a 12-day war, is it? What the heck happened with Iran?
Oh gosh, I'm beginning to sympathize with Nassim Taleb, who goes on with Bloomberg and spends the entire time trying to explain why Bloomberg, the church of conventional wisdom on all things financial, is misguided and wrong. And that's kind of the position I find myself in with a lot of people that I talk to. Not necessarily you, but in general. My generation, as you know, tends to watch the mainstream news and the mainstream media. They don't delve too deeply. They're heavily invested in all of the pension funds. And so all of their thinking is tied to the assumption or the notion that everything's going to be fine. Whatever happens, the government will intervene and make it right, and et cetera, et cetera. I think we're in different territory right now. And when you say what happened in the last 12 days, well, I think the Israelis, we're talking then about Mr. Netanyahu and his inner circle, were frustrated with the lack of progress in terms of dragging the United States into the war against Iran and decided to begin it on the assumption that three things would happen. First, that they would have the advantage of surprise. And indeed, President Trump and his cabinet, his envoys all contributed to that illusion. They helped with surprise. They helped to mislead the Iranians. So the Iranians, the Israelis assumed, would be very weak and completely off their game, if you will, because they weren't expecting to be attacked. Well, as it turns out, they recovered from the attack much more quickly than anybody believed. I certainly was shocked at how rapidly they regained control of their air defenses, how quickly they responded with counterattacks. And indeed, just a few days ago, Ben-Gvir, who is part of the Netanyahu inner circle, was caught saying to a group of Israelis and some Americans, well, we just underestimated the Iranian arsenal. We didn't realize that they had all these missiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what's happened is that what was supposed to be a knockout blow and leave Iran essentially naked in the face of Israeli military power backfired. And the Iranians did not only recover, they began launching huge quantities of missiles, doing enormous damage all over Israel. Now, people are giving various estimates, but a quick look at Haifa or a quick look at Tel Aviv, as well as a lot of military installations, tells the story. Israel has taken a lot of damage, and it has been unable to cope with it. So then they reached a point where it became clear that they desperately needed some interruption in this. Something had to stop because they're running out of missiles of their own. In other words, we can't produce air defense missiles quickly enough to meet the Israeli demand. And just today, Raytheon published some statements about the lack of rocket motors. We don't even build our own rocket motors inside the United States anymore. So you can imagine if we're not building our own rocket motors and we need components from overseas, well, we're in a lot of trouble. So we can't replenish all the missiles that we've shot as well as the Israelis. And we've shot hundreds from our destroyers offshore, as well as from the Theater High Altitude Air Defense Battery that's on the ground in Israel and so forth. So then I think there was a discussion, well, how do we disrupt this? And you got this strike by President Trump. I think President Trump was trying to sort through what he ought to do, what he ought not to do. He was listening to lots of people. Remember, he said, I'm going to take 2 weeks and think about this or something. Then a couple of days later, bang, you get the strike. Well, he consulted with people and they said, this will be really good if you do this. This could bring everything to a halt. And, this would be good for Israel and the United States. And ultimately, that's what we want. And so I think he bought the argument. I think he was also concerned Because a lot of people told him the Iranians can close the Straits of Hormuz. And normally we think of, well, they'll sink a ship there or they'll mine it. Well, they can do those things. But to be quite frank, if the Iranians tell anybody to go that wants to go through the straits, they can't go through. And if they do go through, they risk being sunk. The insurance companies will shut down the Straits of Hormuz because they won't insure the vessels. So I think all of that was swimming around, and the impact of this loss of, say, 20-25% of the world's oil would not be acutely felt immediately here, but certainly around the world. And I think he understood that had implications for China, implications for Russia, for the whole world. And I think then he decided, well, I've got to do something else. Now, we've seen this strike that was launched, and he's been on the television all day long promoting this narrative that we found these installations, we've destroyed all the nuclear capability, it's over. We'd set Iran back for years. Well, the truth is something different. We seem to have hit sites that were empty. There were no nuclear development facilities there. People were removed. The Iranians were warned 2 hours in advance, and the Iranians actually accommodated us. We came in and dropped munitions on empty targets. Then subsequently the next day, the Iranians informed us that they were going to hit our installation, air base in Bahrain. And they knew that we'd already evacuated everyone from Bahrain. So that was an ideal target. They told us they were coming. They bombed it. They destroyed it. In other words, I think you have a situation where, truthfully, neither Iran nor the United States want to go to war with each other. And so he knew that if he did something, that was better than nothing, but he didn't want to do anything that would widen the war. So now he's telling everybody, well, the war is over. There will be no more war. It stopped. And it stopped because I'm the great peacemaker. I'm master of the universe. I control everything. I stopped the Indo-Pakistani war. I stopped all these other things. And now I've stopped this. Both sides are exhausted. They can't continue and so forth. Well, that's not really true. And that's a dangerous thing for him to say. So at this point, I don't have any more to tell you except that more to follow.
Next up, a quick word about my friends at Bitwise. They've been educating investors on Bitcoin for more than 7 years, have over $10 billion in client assets, and a team of 100 plus. Their weekly newsletter is a must read. It's written by their CIO, Matt Hogan, one of the best minds in the business. I highly recommend it. It's witty, bold, and quick. Takes just 5 minutes to read each week. So head over to bitwiseinvestments.com/CIO memo. And always, of course, carefully consider the extreme risks associated with crypto. Well, a lot of this feels like political theater. And to your point, we're being led to believe that this was a very successful strike. These were very key nuclear sites. We destroyed them. We destroyed Iran's ability to have a nuclear weapon. And I think that that's part of what gets so confusing. By the way, off the top of your response, you mentioned Nassim, and his book, Black Swan, has spiked in sales just in the last couple of days because everyone is expecting maybe a Black Swan scenario, World War III to start. And the last time you and I spoke, you actually forecast that we might get into a hot war with Iran. So it seems like some of this is playing out. But right now, to your point, President Trump is saying it's all over. He dropped the bombs, then he dropped an F-bomb when he was questioned by reporters.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
And now things seem to be de-escalated, but you're saying maybe that's not the case and things could erupt again? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, what we have is a ceasefire. That means the two sides have agreed not to shoot at each other. The first, of course, being the Israelis who said we won't shoot. Now, what does that mean? What is the basis for the ceasefire? What is the long-term goal that the ceasefire is supposed to achieve? What are we doing to facilitate some sort of agreement, understanding that will prevent any further killing in the region? Do you know? I don't know. As far as I can tell, there's nothing. And so what we have is a ceasefire, during which I fully expect the Israelis will do everything in their power to get as many missiles, as many weapons as they can, repair radars, repair everything to get ready for the next round. In other words, I don't see any evidence that the Israelis are dancing in the streets saying the war is over, we've won, we can relax. No, quite the contrary. I think Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and so forth are all going to be very, very busy now trying to produce more missiles to get them back up to speed for the next round of attacks. And I think in Iran, the Iranians are happy because they don't want to be bombed. But on the other hand, they're well aware that what they've done is actually quite an achievement. They've overwhelmed Israeli defenses. You know, any air defense system can be overwhelmed. It's just a matter of numbers and time. During World War II, we lost 18,000 bombers, we and the Royal Air Force, trying to penetrate German air defenses. The German air defenses at the time were state of the art. They were excellent. But ultimately, we won because we could produce more bombers faster and send more of them through the air defenses than the Germans could produce pilots, aircraft, anti-aircraft guns, and so forth. The problem for the Israelis is that this is a country smaller than New Jersey. They originally had 9 million people. That consisted of roughly 2 million Arabs and then 7 million Jews. I don't know what the actual population is right now, but a lot of Jews in Israel are trying to leave Israel. In fact, it's gotten out of hand in Cyprus to the point where one of the leading politicians in Cyprus named Stefanou gave a speech and said, we can't allow this to go on. And somebody said, what do you mean can't allow what to go on? Well, the Israelis or people from Israel are buying up all of this property. We're losing control of Cyprus. Well, why would they be buying property on Cyprus? Well, ostensibly, that's where they plan to move. This is not a particularly good sign for Israel. Then there are 700,000 Jews in Israel with American passports. In other words, dual citizens. And our ambassador, Mr. Huckabee, is trying to find a way to help these people leave Israel. These are not good signs. This is too reminiscent, in my judgment, of what's happened in Ukraine with Zelensky. So everybody is saying, oh, no, Israel's invincible, invulnerable, and they're in charge and they control everything. Well, if that's the case, why are we witnessing these things? I think this is a very dangerous situation. I don't see any evidence that anything has ended. I don't know how long this will last. It could last 2 days, could last 2 weeks, could last 2 months. And during that time frame, I think both sides will absolutely re-equip, replenish, and get ready for the next round.
Can we back up for a moment? Because lately on social media, I see people sharing video clips and photographs of Iran, like in the 1970s, where women are in regular clothes, sometimes in bikinis. I mean, life looks actually very progressive and modern. And then there was this massive change that happened. And I also do want to actually make a separation here between the Iranian government and the Iranian people, the Israeli government, the Israeli people, because just like here, I mean, our views as Americans don't always reflect our leaders, right? And the choices that they make. And I think everyone's conflating a lot of this together. But can you back up and talk a little bit about how we got to this level of conflict with Iran and people, I mean, even in the leadership positions like Ted Cruz, when he went on Tucker Carlson's show, kind of hinting that they should have a regime change. President Trump was tweeting about how they should make Iran great again, but that's up to the people. I mean, I'm just a little bit confused, I guess, about the dynamics between the government and the people of each of these countries.
Well, I think you have to distinguish the Iran from 1979 and the Iran today, 46 years later. It's actually very, very different. Some colleagues from Egypt flew to Iran during Ramadan. They actually went to the city of Qom, Qom, which is the theological center of Shia Islam in Iran and in the world, frankly. And they were shocked at what they saw. The restaurants were full. It was all during Ramadan, when normally everybody fasts. If you go to any of the Arab countries, the restaurants were shut down. No one ate until after sundown. Not in Qom and not in Iran. In other words, it looked like most European cities. And contrary to their expectations, most women were not walking around in bags. In fact, anything could be further from the truth. I think Iran has changed a great deal. The mosques that used to be packed and the police that used to herd people into the mosques, literally at gunpoint. You know, you got into trouble if you didn't go to the mosque on Friday or for Friday prayers. That's over. If anything, they have trouble mobilizing people to go to the mosques. I think Iran has changed dramatically. Second thing is, and I'm glad you mentioned this, there are some other similarities between what we started to do in Ukraine and failed to do and what we seem to be interested in doing in Iran. Our objective was not simply to build up Ukraine and turn it into a battering ram that could destroy Russia. We had people in the city of London, banks, in New York City and elsewhere that were salivating at the prospect of bringing down Putin, destroying the regime, ultimately fragmenting Russia, and then stripping Russia of its numerous resources. In other words, make Russia back into a third world vassal state that could be exploited, which is effectively what happened in the 1990s. Well, that's failed. Putin isn't going anywhere. There will be no revolution in Russia, and Putin is strongly supported. So now let's fast forward to Iran. If you look at Iran, Iran has a number of minorities inside of it. I know Ted Cruz is unfamiliar with this sort of thing, but you have Azeri Turks in the north, millions. You have Arabs. You have Baluchis. I mean, we can go down the list. More than 50% of the country consists of a so-called Persian population, original. But the truth is, Persian culture, Persian identity have been extended across the country. The country is actually far more cohesive than everybody thinks. Just as people discovered that Russia was far more cohesive than everybody thought. We have been trying to start Muslim insurrections against the Russian state for years. And look at the performance of the Chechens and the Muslim troops that served with the Soviet armed forces. Brilliant. Being they're among the best troops on the ground fighting in eastern Ukraine. So that's failed. This is the next opportunity by the same group of people to do to Iran what they failed to do to Russia. And no one should have any doubt in their minds about the desire to capture those oil and gas fields in Iran and control it. That's what they want to do. But Iran has turned out to be far more resilient, far more robust than originally thought. And on top of that, of course, you have Russia and China who are both standing with Iran. The defense minister of Russia, when the president of Iran was visiting yesterday, or just before he left, I guess yesterday, said there is no doubt that Russia will stand by Iran. We support them. We will stand by them. The Chinese have said much the same thing. And remember, Pakistan is effectively the face of Chinese power and influence when it comes to support for Iran. So I think everything that was assumed has failed. And the notion that now everything is fine because there will never be a nuclear weapon is absolutely laughable. Because in Iran and across the region, in fact, probably around the world, everyone has concluded if you want to survive in a world where the Americans and their Israeli proxies are ready to attack and destroy you, well, you better get a nuclear weapon. That's the lesson. So now we will see nuclear weapons proliferate.
Well, so was Iran getting close to a nuclear weapon? Because that's something that we've heard from Netanyahu during countless interviews and testimonies before our political leaders in Washington, D.C. I mean, he's been saying this for a long, long time. And then I believe Tulsi Gabbard testified saying, no, they don't. But then President Trump was on the plane and said he doesn't care what Tulsi Gabbard says. And they were very, very close to it. And that's what this was all about. I mean, forgive me for maybe being conspiratorial, but I feel like, of course, they have to be close, right? A lot of our adversaries around the world probably would want a nuclear weapon to be able to defend themselves. So how close were they or weren't they?
Well, if you go back to 1995 and move forward from that, almost every year, you can find public statements and speeches, both here in the United States as well as in Israel, where Mr. Netanyahu is telling everybody Iran is within 2 weeks of a nuclear weapon. Iran is within 2 days of a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's been going on and on and on. Mr. Netanyahu wants and wanted was to drag the United States into a war against Israel's adversaries in the region. That's what he wanted. He's gotten it. Whether we like it or not, we are in fact at war now in a very demonstrable way with Iran. Now we're at war with Russia too, but we haven't engaged directly. So we tend to tiptoe around the illusion that we're not at war with Russia. But the Russians understand that Iran was never a threat until we decided to invest heavily in it, install a government, and fight them. Well, the same thing is true right now with Israel. Israel is very definitely interested in having us on the ground. When I say on the ground, I'm talking about primarily our air and naval power, do everything that we can to utterly destroy and flatten Iran for them. Because Israel is the stalking horse for this regional hegemony. I mean, Israel wants regional hegemony. They're not satisfied with anything less than Iran's total destruction and dismemberment because Iran is the one state that stood up against them. So they very definitely want to see Iran destroyed. But Iran's turning out to be a much tougher nut to crack, and I don't think that's going to happen. So I think this whole thing is going to fail. The question is, how long will it take us to figure that out? And I just don't know the answer.
But in addition to chanting things like death to America, I mean, the pictures that I see out of Iran and the narrative is that, I mean, they stone women, they are extremely oppressive, that even Iranians speak out against the government and they want a sense of freedom that they haven't had since basically the 1970s.
Haven't you seen thousands of these Iranians on the streets of Iran waving Israeli and American flags? There are no such pictures. There are no Israeli or American flags flying anywhere. There are not millions of people in the streets cheering the destruction of their own country.
I've even seen Iranian people posting online saying that they hope that the Ayatollah is toppled. So I guess I feel like even the Iranians are against their own government in some ways, and they would not want nuclear proliferation and that type of risk.
You have definitely internalized the wishful thinking that is widespread inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C.
This episode is brought to you by CASA, the leader in Bitcoin self-custody solutions, helping people like me secure their wealth with simple, powerful multi-key vaults. And now CASA is here to help businesses and even governments do the same. Introducing CASA Business, a secure, easy-to-use 3-key vault designed for small and large businesses with team signing capabilities and a web dashboard. Start your Bitcoin treasury the secure way and protect your assets. Get 10% off your CASA plan at casa.io/Natalie. Up next, BitKey. BitKey is a Bitcoin hardware wallet with multi-sig security, inheritance, and a recovery system designed for real life. No complex setup, no seed phrase, just true self-custody without the stress. It was named one of Time's best inventions in 2024. Use code STORIES for 20% off at bitkey.world. Next up, the Bitcoin way. Bitcoin is only freedom money if you control it fully. The Bitcoin Way can help you learn the skills to properly secure your Bitcoin in 100% self-custody with zero counterparty risk. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Natalie to speak one-on-one with the best experts. Your security and sovereignty are priceless, so don't gamble with your future and peace of mind. Protect your Bitcoin like a pro. CoinKite, the one-stop shop for all your Bitcoin cold storage needs. Their flagship cold card wallet is ultra secure, open source, and beginner friendly. Visit their site, grab 5% off with promo code CoinStories. Want to reach millions of Bitcoin users? Speed Wallet makes it easy. Launch your app on Speed's mini app store. Publish your app in hours, no coding needed. You can also accept Bitcoin payments effortlessly with Speed. Ready to grow? Publish on Speed today. Visit speed.app.
I would tell you that right now, as a result of our attacks and Israel's attacks on Iran, the government in Tehran is stronger than it has ever been and has more support from the population than it has ever had in the past. This whole business of regime change is always based on false assumptions that everybody wants it and that if you just push hard enough, everything will fall apart. That's what they've said about Russia. That's what they're saying now about Iran. What I'm trying to tell you is that's not true. And I know there are lots of things online. And you and I both know that the problem with everything online is like the problem with anything on the internet. It will all put up with anything you put on it. And you also have to consider the very high probability that you're also being treated to a steady diet of disinformation and misleading statements that come out of Israel. Israel plants all sorts of stories all the time designed to make itself look great and Iran look terrible, and tries to foment hostility between the United States and virtually anybody they don't like. I would tell you, if you want to see women subjected to some degree of oppression, certainly the numbers of Christians who are being murdered right now in Syria certainly fills that bill. Now that we have the former deputy commander of ISIS in charge of Syria, thanks to the close cooperation between Mossad, the CIA, MI6, and Turkey, we have essentially a terrorist state in Syria. And for the moment, it's friendly to Israel because it's being told to be friendly by Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. Mr. Erdogan is in charge. You also have Saudi Arabia. You want to see women stoned and put to death? That's a great place to go. You'll find evidence for that, and beheadings and so forth. Not in Iran. So I think there's a concerted effort to keep people in the dark about what is real and what is not, because that's essential to fomenting the support. In the final analysis, though, we're Americans first, and we have to always ask the question, what business is it of ours what people in other countries do, regardless of where they live? This is always a problem. Should we intervene somewhere to correct someone's behavior because we are the model? Everyone should see us. I would point out something that's very important. There are no foreign flags on the streets in Iran. There are no secret fifth columns or anything else. But I can take you to Los Angeles and I can show you crowds with Mexican flags and El Salvadoran flags, and you'll see those in Chicago. That should be of concern to us here at home. And nobody seems to mention it. Our social cohesion is quite weak. And that's why there is no declaration of war. That's why there's no debate. If Americans found out what we were really up to, most Americans would say, why? What difference does it make to us?
It's so crazy also because if you look back at previous presidents, including President Obama, there were a lot of military strikes that he authorized. And obviously his base is not upset about that. But as soon as President Trump does something, I don't know, it's just very, very confusing to kind of figure out what's actually true and what's happening. And there's a lot of just almost like symbolic anger. If it was their team doing it, they'd be fine with it. But because it's the opposite side, they're very, very angry. And it's hard to sift through the noise. But I want to get to the financial aspect of this because obviously if you couldn't just print money out of thin air, it would be a lot more difficult to go to war. So can you talk a little bit about how this ties into your forecast of sort of the financial Armageddon that's on the way? Because it seems like at any moment, if things do erupt, if things get more serious, that is definitely going to hit the financial markets. And we have never been more indebted. I mean, people like to say that the US dollar is backed by the military. Well, if the military has all of its equipment basically made in China and can't replenish anything, then what is the US dollar actually backed by, right? Paper promises, essentially. So what do you think about the economics of all of this?
Well, an astute economist whose views I listen to said to me just the other day, actually it was last night, because I got this article from Raytheon about their inability to produce rocket motors. And of course, we've already heard people talk about rare earths, yes, and nickel and a lot of other precious metals that we need.
Yes, they need all of that from China.
Yeah, well, he said, you can't be a superpower if you can't manufacture stuff. What do we manufacture? Not much.
Debt.
That's our problem. So we've deindustrialized ourselves, made ourselves entirely dependent on foreign sources. You know, I've been a big advocate for rare earth exploitation, extraction here in the United States. I've also talked to lots of people with lots of money and said we've got to build our own rare earth refinery. Right now, if we don't send our rare earths to be refined in China, we've got to send them to Kazakhstan. That's ridiculous. We've got plenty of rare earths in Canada. We have rare earths in the United States if we want to go for it. We have said in the past it's just not economically feasible. That means you can't make enough money from it. Well, we're going to be isolated and we're going to have to make money one way or the other, and we're not going to be able to do it without our own rare earth refinery. So that's just one example. I also am paying a lot of attention right now to something that Nassim Taleb said a few days ago. He said the reserve currency is now gold. He's right. It is. In other words, what good is the dollar? Well, the dollar is still very useful for transactions. We do have BRICS, and we do have an attempt to set up new parallel institutions and exchanges. It's only a matter of time until the world increasingly de-dollarizes. De-dollarization is already underway. So if you juxtapose those things together, then you ask, do we have a crisis? Well, I think we do, but no one's really talking about it. The Germans and the Italians have both said, please send us our gold. That's $143 billion worth of gold. Please send us our gold. And the answer is silence. So now people once again are asking the question, where's the gold? Do we actually have it? All of these people stored their gold under the streets of New York City in these banks. Where is it? If it's not there, what have you done with it? I can't predict when all of this will collapse, but I think it will. And then that brings you back to your favorite topic, Bitcoin. What is really important about Bitcoin? It's a store of value. And the people that want to condemn Bitcoin lose sight of the fact that Bitcoin is worth what people are willing to pay for it. And that's a matter of perception. The same thing is true for the United States economy. It's a matter of perception. Our sovereign debt grows, I don't know, by another $1 trillion every so many months. It's insane. Yet we're going to have $1 trillion defense budget. Really? We're not going to cut any spending? Really? Yeah. We are on thin ice in a way that I don't think has ever been true in our country's history. The dollar is losing the battle for credibility, but more important, our economy is losing the battle for credibility. And when will the stock market reflect this? When people wake up and say, oh my God, I've invested in all of these pension funds and all of these pension funds are going to collapse. I'm going to lose this. Freddie Mac and Freddie Mae, they came under federal control after the last debacle in 2008. I'm told that they constitute what is referred to as agency debt, as separate from sovereign national debt. That's another 7 to 8 trillion in debt. This can't go on. I mean, what did Ben Stein say? Things will continue until they can't. And I think an awful lot of this is psychological awareness. And most of my generation, you and I have talked about this before, the boomers. I talked to people who said, well, that's not what they said on Fox. That's not what they said on CNN. I said, good Lord, man, is that all you listen to? Well, yeah. This is the problem. I grew up with Walter Cronkite. If Cronkite said something, everybody believed him. Now, was he always right? No, but 90% of the time he was. And he was doing his best to be truthful. Huntley Brinkley was very similar. These were icons. People said they're not going to lie to us. That's why when our friend Walter Cronkite said now is the time to leave Vietnam, we failed in February 1969, LBJ said, oh my God, we've lost the Vietnam War. We've lost Walter Cronkite. Well, there are no Walter Cronkites in the mainstream media. We know who owns the mainstream media. So you're getting the predigested crap that the mainstream media wants you to believe.
Well, you bring up so many interesting points, and I believe a lot of people in your generation, they still think that America has the leverage it once had around the world. But to your earlier points, we're moving into a more multipolar world. I think gold will be used increasingly as the settlement layer as opposed to treasuries because we've abused our position as global reserve currency. I think Bitcoin is a better solution since we can actually verify Bitcoin, right, and how much there is and where it's being held, as opposed to trying to figure out how much gold any single country has. It's just not the right monetary technology for the modern day, in my opinion. But how do you see this playing out over the coming months? Because it seems like we're always able to kick the can down the road. We talked about earlier, Trump tweeted that, hey, the 12-day war, it's over now. Things are calm. But what do you think is going to happen? What should people be prepared for?
Well, I hope that people will be very skeptical about the notion that the current war is over. And I'm talking about the war in the Middle East. The war in Ukraine is not quite over. I think we're within reach of an end to this, but it's not over yet. It won't be over until the Russians cross the Dnieper, go into Kiev, and then capture Odessa, in my judgment. I think that's coming. In the Middle East, it's very different. One of two things has to happen. Iran has to be destroyed and then subjected to what we were discussing earlier, potentially fragmentation, chaos, and the installation of some new puppet regime that will respond to Israel and the United States. Or Israel faces destruction. Now, I hope that's not true, but I really do think that's where we're headed. Now, I don't know when this will recommence, but I do know from my sources inside the defense industries that they are very definitely doing everything they can to ramp up and provide the additional missiles and radars and other equipment that the Israelis need as quickly as possible. So that's going to go on. Will this coincide with a sudden recognition that our economy is moribund, that the numbers don't add up, the GNP numbers, the GDP numbers are phony? I keep hearing about 4% unemployment. I'm suspicious. I look out there and I see an awful lot of Americans who have left the labor market. And I think that's going to become a sore point, because I think ultimately the trend is this. We're moving from abundance, which we've enjoyed for decades, to scarcity. And we've made so many enemies. No one is really interested, if they can avoid it, in doing business with us. The Chinese, we unnecessarily offended them and tried to attack them with these tariffs. That hasn't worked. It's absolutely boomeranged on us. We're not getting big, beautiful trade agreements. That's all nonsense. So where are we headed? I think it's pretty obvious. We're headed into this pond where there are multiple black swans out there swimming around, Natalie. And you're asking me which one takes off first. I'm more worried about the fact that when one takes off, the others will say, oops, it's time to go too. And we'll have black swans all over the place, inside our country, in our economy, in our markets, as well as in the military and overseas. And by the way, this is just some advice for the audience, because I went through this in Vietnam. When somebody steps forward and says, oh, I just want to tell you that our men are the greatest in the world, and we have the greatest military in the world, and no one else could have done what we did, and we're the best. I remember listening to the same nonsense during the Vietnam War. It didn't rescue us from defeat in Vietnam. And I think we need to be very, very suspicious of this kind of language, because it's designed to distract everyone from the truth. No one shot at us. And if no one shoots at you, it's pretty easy to look good. I hate to be blunt. It's when they shoot at you that everything changes. Now, I don't want to be shot at. I would like to avoid it, but we're still there and we're not leaving. And I don't think we will leave until we're shot at in a big way. That's the problem. So all of the inconsistencies, the weaknesses we're discussing, they could all metastasize at near simultaneously. And then we're in a lot of trouble.
It's just so frustrating that it seems like the majority of Americans, they just want peace. They just want, a livable wage. They want to be able to take care of their families. And no matter who gets in office, it seems like quality of life continues to deteriorate. We continue to get into more global conflicts. And I feel sad for people who go out to the polls. I mean, and this is including me, right? You vote for a smaller government and lower taxes and more accountability and less government waste and fraud and less wars. And now it just seems like no matter what, we're just, I don't know. It's like the political leaders want to walk us into more chaos and a decline of American prosperity. And it's like, how do we right this ship? We really need people that can be at the helm, that take accountability, and they're not just in it for their own, becoming the wealthy elites. We need people that are really in there to serve the public. And it just seems like no matter who's in office, this is why I love Bitcoin. It's apolitical, and it allows you to kind of subvert everything that's happening with the government, because it's a neutral monetary technology. It has nothing to do with left or right. I really have hope that this is the one thing that can actually solve some of these problems, because politics is just going to destroy us, I think, from within.
Well, you saw, I hope, the Tucker Carlson interview with Ted Cruz, the senator.
I did, yeah.
And I think that's very, very important for Americans to watch that. Now, of course, Tucker Carlson is being attacked as an anti-Semite because he doesn't support Israel's war against Iran and its behavior in the region and what it's doing in Gaza. This is the ad hominem attack that happens immediately. They've used the anti-Semitism tripe so much now that it's beginning to lose any effect. I think what we need to understand from that, regardless of what they think about Israel, look at Cruz. Look at his answers and what he says. This is a man who's highly educated. This is a man who was elected from one of the biggest states in the country. He is potentially a very, very influential figure. And he demonstrated conclusively he's not in the game. He's not really informed. What is he interested in? He's interested in Ted Cruz and the people that provide him with the money to stay in office and the advantages of cooperating with people who have money that are willing to keep him in office. That's the problem. And I don't know how to fix that. And I don't know if you can vote your way out of it, because a lot of it seems to be rigged to the point where it's impossible. Somebody said earlier today, Donald Trump, for whom we all voted on the assumption that he meant what he said and was going to get us out of these overseas quagmires and would do something serious about immigration, because the border, by the way, they're not coming over in droves, but all the illegal human and drug trafficking continues through the legal ports of entry, because the people manning those are being paid tens of thousands of dollars on top of their salary to turn the other way. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the ports and other parts of the American border that are porous. My point is that people voted for him in the expectation that he would address these things. And they're finding out that it's not working. And this could blow up in his face in a big way in the Middle East. That could really expose him. But it's not just a question of exposing him. It's our economy, our way of life, everything that we enjoy here. It could all be crushed in a very short period of time, because if the Straits of Hormuz inevitably are closed, if the oil is shut off for much of the world, China will survive. The Russians will double down on their production of petroleum. They'll make up the shortfalls. But the rest of the world will suffer. And the rest of the world will turn against us. It's already begun that way. That's why BRICS is so popular. BRICS is the future. BRICS is going to dominate the global economy. We aren't. We can't. We have no manufacturing base to speak of, except we build a lot of military equipment, which everybody says is the best. Doesn't look that good in Ukraine.
Well, I'm someone who does believe that a lot of America is already in a silent depression. So I hope that we can recover from this. I really do believe that everyone just needs to be a little bit more empowered in terms of their knowledge. So the education needs to just spread. They need to be watching programs with different, diverse voices so that they can better understand what is actually happening and maybe have their point of views challenged a little bit, which not enough people allow for. And I hope that they become economically empowered so that they can get through this, because there's definitely going to be some pain ahead. Any final thoughts, Colonel?
No. I think you've said it beautifully. I hope you're right. But I think people learn, unfortunately, the hard way.
Yeah, for sure. That's what worries me, for sure. A lot of people have hope, and they put their hope and their faith in their leaders, and so many times they let us down. But thank you so much for all your wisdom, your insights, your context, and I hope we get to talk again soon about more bright and happy things than 12-day wars. Thank you so much, Colonel.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Coin Stories. Make sure you're subscribed to the show so you don't miss any new episodes. If you can, turn on those notifications and leave us a positive review. They really help the show grow organically with new listeners. We have a free weekly newsletter. Sign up at thenewsblock.substack.com. This show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. I'm always open to feedback and guest suggestions, so please feel free to reach out at info@talkingbitcoin.com. I'll see you next time.